All right, Jennifer, thank you for joining me today.
Well, it is my absolute pleasure.
So I'd love to start things off with you telling me a little bit about your own branding journey. How did you begin and how did you get to where you are today?
Branding, not a word that I had in my head when I started. So I first thought of myself as a filmmaker way back in the 80s. And then it wasn't very successful at that. So I transitioned to screenwriting and wasn't very successful at that either. And out of that darkness of my early creative efforts not bearing the fruit that I immediately expected and wanted, I had a kind of I guess we might call it now a quarter life crisis. And out of that came the title for my first book, which was called The Woman's Comfort Book, which in time became a word of mouth bestseller and really started my whole career. But even as that started, and I started getting media requests and keynote requests and things that I didn't even know what they were, I didn't think of myself as a brand. I thought of myself as a writer. And this is actually not a great distinction that I made. And I didn't unmake it for far too long. So because the way that the publishing industry used to work and the way that my mind as a creative worked was all about being chosen, right? It was all about one project to the next and what was the next project going to be and how were you going to, get a good advance and who were you going to get to pick it and, so I did that for way too many years and I didn't start to think of myself as a brand or a business, which I tend to think of more. Oh, probably until about starting maybe around 2000. And then I still didn't really get out of that. I'm a creative, I'm a writer, please choose me, please like me, for probably another 10 years. It's so embarrassing to say.
It's fairly typical. I think a lot of writers, you spend so much time putting yourselves out there and trying to get an agent and trying to get a publisher and relying on other people that it's hard to take ownership of your own work.
I also think there's this other part, which is it's kind of dirty. Like business is dirty. Like I have friends who I shall not name, but who are big literary famous authors who regularly appear on the New York Times bestseller list. And they're lucky. They don't have to do a lot of business stuff. They really are in that old mode, I call it, or maybe the classic mode of being a writer. And I'm in some ways jealous of them. I mean, they get to just write, but they sometimes look down on me because I'm like little Miss Hustle, little Miss Business, little Miss have all different kinds of income streams. And for the first 15 years of my life, I didn't. Most of my income was strictly from writing, publishing deals, and big royalty checks. But that changed. And I wasn't going to go get a straight job because I'm unemployable.
So what was the catalyst for that change?
Well, there's probably a variety of things, but I remember my first publisher, my first, I think, 4 books was Harper. So Harper Collins and Harper and Row that became Harper Collins. And then I was with Harper San Francisco that I think is now Harper One. So, lots of changes there, but they had a big, author day where they had all their authors come in and they had different speakers come in and tell us. And one of the speakers, so this was like 1998, 1999, told all of us about getting an email list and that you had, and that you couldn't just write to it every now and then, you had to write to it regularly. And man, did I take that to heart. And I'm not a super innovative person. Like I'm not a late adopter, but I'm rarely an early adopter. I don't understand people who wait in line to see the movie or wait in line to get an iPhone. I'm like, just wait a few weeks, right? Save your time. But that was an early adopter thing for me. And I really got in on web technology and I got in on building a big email list. And so that was probably the beginning of starting to feel like I was a business person. I also have to say, I was absolutely raised in a business family. When I got my first straight job out of film school and called my dad to tell him, he said, "Why did you get a job? I thought you wanted to write." I did have a lot of entrepreneurial sort of, like that's the religion I grew up in.
Well, and that must have made such an impact because I think so many people who came from parents or families who worked corporate jobs, blue collar jobs, it's really difficult for them to understand the life that we choose.
Yes, and I didn't realize that until I was with my second partner, my now second husband, and he had an academic. He was on an academic track. He got hired away from it, and he's had a 30-year career in environmental nonprofit. And when I didn't realize how that mindset was until he said to our kids, well, of course you'll go to graduate school. And I'm like, I'm thinking, well, why would you go to graduate school? Just go out and start making stuff. But it was such a light bulb for me. Of course, some people will want to go to graduate school. My daughter's pursuing psychology, and she's going to need to go to graduate school. She's going to stay in the career, right? That makes sense. That real dull.
And so how do you feel, if it had any impact, how did the transitioning to look at your art and your creative work as a business, how did that affect your writing or the way you approach your writing, or did it?
You know, that is such a great question, Dana. I have never thought about that. I have thought about it, how it's affected me as a person, which was to stop waiting to be chosen and stop being a victim and stop thinking someone was going to rescue me, whether I hired that person or they chose me. So that was profound, and it took a long time, and it still creeps in every now and then, right? I'm like, oh, they'll have a good idea, or she'll, maybe that's, I have to constantly remind myself. I went for a run this morning, which is why I have no makeup on and my hair's up in a dirty bun, or dirty ponytail. But, and on the run, I'm like, yeah, don't forget, you have to keep choosing you. Like, I have to relearn the lesson over and over again. But in terms of my writing, okay, this is what I think. I don't think I really I think I've kept my writing over here. Like, my books are different than the rest of my business. And I think I'm just starting to integrate the book I'm working on now with the rest of my business. So isn't that, that's a light bulb. Thank you.
My pleasure. Well, and I think that, the rest of your business is so dependent on the fact that you are a writer, that you are in the trenches, you understand your community in a way that someone like a book publicist may not.
That's true. But I think what you're showing me, which I didn't think of before, was I write every week for my newsletter / the blog. So, and I write my copy, and I write about writing. So I'm really in that trenches, but my books I've always kind of kept over in like a kind of almost a precious little place. And I think I'm breaking those walls down this year.
Well, speaking of your blog, your recent post had explored the idea of turning pro, and I really enjoyed the post. I really thought it was an interesting concept. I was wondering if you could expand on that for the listeners.
Yeah, well, it came from a book by Steven Pressfield, which many of you probably have read. And the book itself, he's a great, I don't know him personally, but he seems like a great guy, and I love his ideas. The book itself was a little too masculine for me and a little bit too much war metaphors. But the idea that I could be acting like an amateur instead of a pro, that idea, that distinction was gigantic. And I really started to examine all of the stuff we've already been talking about, waiting to be chosen, thinking somebody else has the answers. Like I think my way that I've played amateur has been different than some people. Like, I have showed up, I have published, I've been very consistent in my business and in my social media and all of that stuff. But I think there's layers to it. And for me, it's really been about embracing the fact that I am called to help women really show up for their lives. And I often ran away from that because I wanted to be called to be a cool Saturday Night Live writer, right? Or I wanted to be called to be a novelist. And maybe I will be someday, right? So far that hasn't worked out. But can we embrace the call and show up for it that's here? So that's been my personal turning pro journey. I think for a lot of other people, it's about consistency. It's about working with our minds so that our fears and our fear habits don't shape us. I think it's about not waiting for that killer idea. I hear that so often from people, right? I just heard it from someone the other day. Can you promise me that if I work on this project, it's what I'm supposed to be doing? And I'm like, no, I can't, because I don't think there is that thing. I think we have these ideas and these obsessions that we iterate. Maybe sometimes they pass through, but I swear mine just keep coming back. Even when I did write fiction, they were still there.
Well, and those are the sticky ones. I think as creative people, we get ideas all the time. I'll be walking the dog or driving the car, and I get lots of ideas. It's the ones that keep coming back that are the ones worth pursuing, that they're stickier.
They're these signature themes that we have, right? And if you read anybody's a body of work from someone, you see those over and over again. You know, I'm thinking of Philip Roth or Kurt Vonnegut, or I've been rereading Kathleen Norris, who's done is a Catholic, a Benedictine, sorry, and just reading some of her work for the book I'm working on. I'm like, yeah, same themes that she keeps returning to.
That's funny that you said that, because when we work with authors on their author brand, they always come to us and like, well, I have a YA series and I have this crime fiction novel and I also have a literary novel. And they're like, my brand is all over the place. And I said, you know, no matter what, I've never seen an author who doesn't have some recurring theme, some type of character, some type of story that they keep coming back to.
Yes, like we've been watching. We listened to or read all the J.K. Rowling's detective,
Robert Galbraith.
Right. Yes. Writing under that name. And now we're watching the TV series on Cinemax. And you can just see her themes. Like her themes are the upper class is horrible. Bob, we just keep stopping the show to like talk about these themes and then how she's, you know, keeps showing up with them so clearly.
And so you mentioned this idea of your calling being to work with women and help women. Was it always something that was gender specific that you really wanted to help women specifically, or was that an iteration or something that happened over time?
No, I think it was always very specific for women. I mean, when I look back at my early screenplays that I wrote that were never produced, they had strong female characters. They were about, you know, for want of a better word, feminine empowerment. And I identified so strongly as a feminist so early on. And I had a wonderful mother, and she never got to realize herself. Some of it was her choice, and some of it was constraints that her childhood put on her, and then constraints that my father put on her. And I think that I didn't realize how much that motivated me to not have that life, but also to see other women, that they would have a different life. That they would see those constraints, especially in the creative life, because to me, creativity is essential for living fully. It's not about selling it and sharing with other people is great, and I love to help people do that. But my core work is you have to claim that part of yourself and develop it and keep it juicy.
So has your identity as a feminist changed over the years? I mean, obviously, from when you were young to now, a lot has changed very quickly. How has your identity as a feminist, or what it means to be a feminist, changed?
Has it changed?
Has it changed?
I don't know. I thought the other day, last week, or whenever it was International Women's Day, I'm like, we still need an International Women's Day. We're still talking. We're so many of the issues. Yes, it feels like it's bursting and bursting again and bursting again. And I do feel like some of the deep change we've been working for all these years, and way before I was born, is happening, and it's going to keep happening. I have a lot of faith. I was thinking about that on my run today too. As much nastiness and horror as there is in the world right now, and in the U.S. political system, it does feel like there's just so much more diversity and so much more recognition of how privilege and patriarchy and racism are keeping people, and sexism down. But gosh, I don't think it has changed. You know, I don't think it has changed. I feel like the issue is the same until we can fully be whoever we are. So maybe it's just a bigger agenda now.
Mm-hmm. And I think also like you said, we've made so much progress, and women, especially in entrepreneurship, are so empowered by entrepreneurship and taking control over their own gender pay gap and taking control over their own work schedules. And yet you still see pay gap, you still see discrepancies in the entrepreneur field.
Yeah, absolutely. And startup money.
Absolutely. Right. So, one of your other lines of business essentially is you run these amazing looking retreats, these writing retreats. Are these all women as well?
They are. And anyone who identifies, I'm very open for gender identification. But nobody who identifies as a male attends. And the reason why that is that just early on, I found that women would often change how they presented themselves. They wouldn't feel as safe. They would change their voice. Would that still happen now? I don't know. Maybe women have claimed more of their power and desire, but I started doing it to create a safe space.
Yeah. And I think it does change it changes the dynamic even in all male spaces too. I think that when there's something to be said for separate gender learning and community, I think coeducation is valid and so important in so many ways, but also having those separations, I think, is equally important.
Yeah. And for me, the most important thing is not to exclude someone who is somewhere else on the gender or sexual identification spectrum. So that's always hard to include in my copy, right?
It's tricky.
Just email me and we'll talk about it.
Absolutely. So tell me about how you got into writing retreats and these like self-care retreats, and how did your first one come together? What motivated you to start them, and what's changed over the years?
Oh, lots changed. So when the first book came out, I started getting asked, well, at first I started teaching myself to teach workshops. And then I started doing a lot of keynotes and media. And then the second book actually was for couples. So I did some workshops that were for couples of different genders, and I hated it. I hated working with men. That was unresolved stuff that I had. So we just put that aside. That book still sold really well. And then I wrote a book about pregnancy because got pregnant. And then I wrote the Woman's Retreat book. And so I really spent a year just diving into what is a retreat and what is the archetype of a retreat, and really creating this sort of do it yourself or do it with a friend or do it with a small group book. And that started leading me to get invited to teach retreats. And I think the first one was at Omega up in Rhinebeck. And I just remember oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm doing. I've written an entire book about it, but I don't know what I'm doing. Because I was really comfortable going on retreats by myself, but I hadn't really led that experience. So it became this weird immersion year after year. So that was probably 1998, of really teaching myself what makes a safe container. What are all the elements, the layers, and year after year, event after event, getting better at it. And so at first they were self-care retreats, sort of, replenish yourself, recalibrate yourself. And after about 12 years of writing about that and doing work around that, I really started to get tired of it. And as I look at this multi-billion-dollar industry that is self-care, I kind of wish I hadn't, because I think I would have made a lot more money if I would have been like Gwyneth Paltrow. But I'm like many of your people listening, you have to innovate, right? Because that's what keeps you interested. Otherwise you get depressed. And I was getting really sad and a lot of feelings of why bother to do this. So that started to lead me to what would it be like to create a writing retreat. From a marketing point of view, I remember the idea was writing retreats will sell better than self-care retreats, because even though there's a huge self-care element in my retreats, people are coming to get something done. And they like that, right? They like having something to tell people or to tell their busy mind. And of course, lots of us want to write, and it's nice to get away and have someone create that space for you.
And so I would assume that a lot of the formats, the approach depends on the size of the retreat, the location, all of those things. So what sort of factors should people consider if they're like, oh, I've never done a writing retreat, this is something I want to pursue?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. So you really have to think about what you want to get out of the retreat. So I'll have a range of people come who they want time set aside to work on a very specific project. And so I give them, I need you to come in the morning for this one session and the evening for this one session. Everything else is optional. So if you know that you need a lot of writing time and you want someone to be holding the space for you because otherwise you'll be on Facebook, then you want a schedule that's more flexible. I would for sure say no matter why you're going on a retreat, you want to look for a retreat that has enough time to write, that isn't scheduling everything. One of the things that I had to learn over the years is not to offer too much, because even if I tell people, you don't have to come to everything, they're like, oh, but I should come, right? And so I try to build in the question, what do you want? What do you desire throughout the retreat so they can choose? But I also build in plenty of quiet, silent time where we're writing. Yeah, I would think about, do you want to write how do you write best? Like a lot of the women who come, they want to write near people. So we'll take over a property, or I do one at my house every year. And there's all kinds of little nooks and crannies in my house, and there's a big open space. So do you want it, will you get more done? Will you feel safer, more productive if you're around people, or do you want to go off to your little cabin or your room? So start to think about what might work for you, but also what might shock you into a new level of seeing your project. And do you want to learn? Is there a teacher that you want to learn from? I don't teach a ton of craft at my retreats because we have such a wide range of people. But a couple of them are more specialized, and I'll do more craft. So, you know, do you want to do something where you're learning a particular thing, but also have time to write? Then the last thing I would ask you to consider is, what does the person teaching mean by retreat? Because that word's gotten super popular, and people don't always use it in a way that I think they use it in a way where it's more of a class or a workshop or a conference, all of which are great, but they're different than what a retreat is to me, which includes plenty of silence and reflective time to write, and honestly, some kind of very nourishing inner element.
And then what do you view as your role in the retreat? Do you view yourself as a facilitator, as an active participant? How do you distinguish your role within these events?
It's a great question. I am not an active participant. I take an almost therapeutic role. I think back to my very first therapist in my 20s, who was that fabulous and changed my life, but very much was, you're not going to know anything about me personally. I mean, I talk about, they know me. I mean, I'm very open about myself on social media and in my blog, but I'm not there. I'm there to hold the space for them. So my first and most important role is to hold the space. So for that entire 4 days, 5 days, 7 days, whatever it is, I am scanning the container. I am looking at who needs bringing forward, who needs maybe a little containing of their talking or energy, who needs reminding people of the rules. I have a strong no advice rule. I remind people over and over again, we're now going into this period of silence. You are not going into town for this period. This is writing time. This is silent time. And I also feel like being as fully present as I can. Now that doesn't mean when I go to my cabin or my room, I'm not like, oh, I'm going to like take a nap or read my novel. I'm not on all the time, but when I'm in the group, I'm very aware of being fully present and honest and authentic. And then I think it's also about, for me, it's been over the years, it's been looking at all the things I layer in together and how they interlock to create this really rich experience. And then I can trust a lot of those elements that then maybe I'm not managing anymore, but I know they're there.
So it sounds like a lot of your approach to each individual retreat may change during the retreat based on the needs of the attendees.
To some degree, like what I would say more is it's managing the energy. So for example, in October, most of the people who come to my October retreat have worked with me repeatedly, and a lot of them know each other. So managing that retreat is really different than, say, the April retreat that's coming up, where there's a lot of people who are new and don't know each other. So it's more about creating community for that. October retreat is more about saying, okay, whoa, we're here to work. We're not here to have a party. And I have to also watch the things that trigger me. I drink socially, but I don't like alcohol at my retreats. But I also know for some people that's like, it's impossible. I need to have a drink at night. So I have no drinking in my public spaces. But sometimes people are like, oh, let's all get together in my room and have a drink and things like that. I just have to watch what makes me really uncomfortable versus what doesn't make anybody else uncomfortable.
Well, it's certainly a balance of delivering something that they want and creating an experience for them, but also kind of knowing more than they do and understanding the benefits of some of these things, even though they want to chat during silent time or
right. And just keep framing that in a really non-shaming way. I loved it because one of the women who's coming in April was like, so is this like, can I bring alcohol or not? And a bunch of the women is on the Facebook group where they coordinate rides. And a bunch of women came in and said, this really wonderful things, which is you're just really looking to get rid of as many distractions as you can. And Jen will be gently reminding you of that, right? And so I'm gently reminding them of, concept in my early book, which I call shadow comforts, which Brene Brown has quoted a bunch, which is this idea that these things that we do to nurture ourselves actually numb us out or distract us. And we want to minimize those on retreats.
Yeah. And so what do you think in terms of, you said, you don't have a lot of teaching, you want to give a lot of writing time, or you don't teach a lot on craft. Are you leading different sessions? Or are you bringing in other people to teach different types of sessions? When you're not writing, what's the other workshop time like?
Yeah. So what I do every morning is I have different writing warm-ups, and I try different things, and I'll do a little bit of graph teaching. Like I might teach about different camera shots, like how you can use a big far away angle or a really high angle, or you can be in a close-up, and I'll read, like there's a David Sedaris piece I read, and then we'll break that down, and then I'll give them a little writing exercise. Then I might read a poem and give them a line from that to read. So I'll mix things up, and I'll keep giving them examples as I get to know their projects, how to use those for their projects to get their words going. So that's optional. Then people meet, and I give them a small group for the entire week, and they really love that. And I run those very closely and carefully, and they have things that they talk about and share in those groups for a very specific period of time. Then they go write. Then we have lunch. I'm available for part of the writing time if they get stuck to coach them. And then after lunch, I always do some kind of seminar. So the first day I do a whole interactive thing on how to work with the critic and how to work with that part of your mind from a neurobiological point of view, from a meditation point of view, from an active imagination point of view. And then the second day I talk about I do like an hour and a half, 2 hours on how do you find the point of what you're working on? How do you find the hook? How do you find, you have all this material, and everything I pick to teach is always based on what I see everybody needs, right? So everybody, no matter what you're writing, needs to know what's the point. And it's really hard. It's really hard to know the point. Everybody has to work with their mind and their self-doubt and their critical thoughts. Then I do have a guest teacher who comes and teaches one workshop, and that's the next day. And then I usually do an art thing the next afternoon because people are feeling pretty burned out. So yeah, that's what it looks like. And there's one other thing in there I forgot.
It sounds amazing. I think it's such a gift to be able to take that time and focus solely on your craft away from the distractions of families and work and phones and all these things that it feels going back. This kind of leads me into my question about self-care. It seems the inner critic may say something like, oh, this is too indulgent. I'm going to take 7 days for myself and my hobby, and this feels too indulgent. But I think that with all your exploration of self-care and what self-care means, it seems like it's turning that concept on its head. Like this isn't indulgence. This is a necessary part of your health and taking care of yourself.
There's nothing indulgent about it. I mean, women leave those retreats. The first night I have them go around and just look at everybody in the circle. And then the last morning we do this beautiful closing ritual, and I have them go around and look at everybody, and everybody always comments how different everyone looks. And I made a joke one year that it's the retreat facelift. And then I got an email last year from one of the participants. The first time she had attended, and she went to her book group after she got back, like the day or two after she got back, and they're all like, "So you went away and got work done?" And she's like, "What are you talking about, work done?" And they're like, "You got something done to your face. You got some work done." She's like, "No, I didn't. I went on a writing retreat."
That's amazing.
No, I just think there's such, our bodies show our profound need to tend our voices and tend our stories and tend our ideas, whether we're going to share them with the world or not. And having shared a shit ton of stuff with the world, it's not what matters. I do believe there's a loop that's closed. So we do read at my retreats in a very specific way without feedback. But I do think we need to share our work, but it's not the point. And when we think it's the point, it can really set us up for profoundly unhappiness. Profound unhappiness.
When I think the reading out loud, I went to creative writing. I was a creative writing major. And so the program I was in had such an emphasis on reading out loud. We did not swap work ever. Everything was oral tellings. And what I found that it did that really helps me in my role now is that it gave you a sense of audience. We were always instructed to address our work to someone across the semicircle, to pick a person and read it to them. And having that connection with the reader versus just telling it to your journal and telling it out to the ether, it changes your voice, it changes the purpose, the urgency. And so having that skill set, even though it can be nerve-wracking to people who've never done it before, it's really important. It really impacts the writing itself.
It's so true. And one of the things that I have to really work with my writers on is claiming the fact that they can write for someone else. And claiming what I always call it stretch to connect, right? And so what does that mean? Well, it means like you actually have to tell me what your husband looks like. I don't know what your husband looks like. It actually, you really have to bring me into your childhood bedroom. I don't know what the carpet felt like. You actually have to, so you're writing this nonfiction business book. Great. I have never been in the business world. I had no idea this jargon that you're, spewing at me. You got to explain it. You got to make it, I may not be your ideal reader. So anyway, you get my drift. Yeah. It's huge.
No, I think that's really important. I think we take for granted fiction or nonfiction. We take for granted what we know. And we need to communicate that with the audience and whoever is reading her.
But there's a deeper issue that I find I have to work with my writers on, which is that allowing themselves to be intimate with someone else. And really allowing themselves to be in a relationship with the reader.
Yeah. And we did our team, our 4-person team had our team retreat back in February. And one of the women who works for me led us in this beautiful creativity exercise through several prompts and journaling. And it was just so beautiful. And all of our journal entries, we were prompted to read out loud. And what I heard from everyone, including myself, as I was reading my own work, is you start with the safe stuff, the stuff you feel safe and knowledgeable that is going to be fine and well received. And then as you're going through the stream of consciousness, the walls start to break down and everything starts to break down and your critic starts to break down. And it was really interesting to see, even I, who feel very comfortable writing and sharing my work, but there was still that safe stuff at the front. And then you get to the real meat of it 3 or 4 pages in.
Right. Yes, exactly.
And so in terms of going back a little bit to self-care and, what that means to you and how that's changed since you came out with your first book, has your ideas about self-care changed? Are there some misconceptions about self-care? Obviously, you said it's a huge buzzword industry right now. So what are your feelings about it?
Well, yes, it changed dramatically within the first few years I was doing it. What I realized, and I didn't really totally realize when I was writing the first book, is that self-care is feminism, because self-care says, I matter. My desires matter, my body matters, what I want to eat matters, how I want to use my time matters, therefore my life matters. And I got that to some degree, but I really got it after a few years of teaching workshops. And so that, I would say, is the essential thing that is sometimes missing from the self-care conversation. It's great to talk about it as stress relief. It's great to talk about it as pleasure. All of those things are essential to be healthy. But in the end, it is, I think, this radical act which says, I matter. And I matter in these ways that I might not look like self-care to you, but they recharge me. I think something that also is really missing from the self-care debate is a lot of self-care, especially as you get older, is super boring, right? Like I went for a run this morning and then I went to the chiropractor. Okay, neither one of those things were like, yeah, oh my God, I'm so excited to do these things, but I need to do them, right? They fit into what makes me feel good. And choosing those things for myself is that revolutionary part, right? And something that I see still with women more my age than your age, which is it's not okay to do that. I actually had a friend of mine say she had a rash on her legs from running, and I said, I have some Benadryl cream in my room. We were in Utah, and she said, oh no, I like to suffer. And she laughed, but I think that's still very much out there. So that's why, again, I think self-care can be such a radical act. I think self-care is a very, in its heart, is a very spiritual practice. And I know that the way that I practice like self-compassion practices and meditation for sure are been deeply spiritual and transformational for me. And I also think that maybe part of what's missing in the conversation is just continually understanding how self-care is a privilege for so many of us and not available to so many people, and how can we be aware of that and possibly change that.
And I like how you broke it down into this very simple example of I matter. Yeah. I think it's taking, I used to always think of self-care as putting on your oxygen mask first, where as parents, we put on other people's oxygen mask all the time. And so
we're wiping their butts.
Right. And as service providers, we give so much to our clients, to our communities. But if we're not taking care of ourselves, then like those communities, and we're not going to be able to do that. We're not going to be able to take care of anyone else. And so, but going a little bit further and just saying I matter, what I need matters, I think is a really empowering statement.
It's a good, and it's kind of, it brings you back just to this core feeling of, well, of course I do. Do I believe I do? Like, what work do I need to do around that? Do I need to grab my journal right now and bring myself back? The other way I've defined self-care over the years is it brings you back to yourself. You know, it really brings you back to that, yeah, I'm here. And, you know, and the first level of that is just calming our nervous systems down, of course. But
oh, yeah. I think about this past week, our son had off school, and a couple of the parents, they thought we were going to have childcare, but we didn't. And so we had like a bunch of kids over at our house that I took while all the parents needed to work. And that evening, my wife came home and I was like, I think I'm going to go and sit at a restaurant and read a book and eat dinner by myself. And
love it.
That was I parented hard all day, and now this is what I need. And when I, like you said about the writer's retreat facelift, when I came home, she looks at me, she's like, you really needed that, didn't you? I said, I did. And now I'm back, and we can parent all weekend, and I will not feel like I'm running on fumes.
I love that. So I have a question for you. As someone in a same-sex marriage, do you find that it's easier to support each other in your self-care needs than maybe friends that you see, and not that you're in their marriage, but that are in, you know, male-female or male?
That's a really interesting question. I think that we work really hard on taking care of each other, because I am definitely a caregiver, someone who takes care. We always joke that she had to carry our son because it would probably end in divorce if I carried, because
you never share.
I would, because I'd be the one, I'm totally fine going out at 2 a.m. for pickles because she has a craving. Whereas for me, she's like, oh, I've been taking care of you for like 8 months. Like, when is it going to be over?
I think that's me. I'm her.
So we know that about ourselves. And I think that we also had a big shift that before we were parents, I did a lot of endurance racing, which was very time consuming. And so we acknowledged that when we became parents, that there was going to be a dramatic shift in no more Saturday 8-hour cycling sessions, those sorts of things. And I think that
it is. It's super endurance sports. They aren't compatible with a lot of things.
Right. And so I think now that we've gone through that transformation of I have been more present, I've been here. Now those things, when I say I'm going to go on a long run this morning, or I need to go out on a Friday night by myself and hang, there is much more support there, because we know that we've both been supporting each other. So I'm not sure if it's men or women versus this is how our relationship is. I think it's also, you know, we have, and I don't know why, but we have a lot of stay-at-home dads in our friend circle, and we have a lot of very active, present fathers. Like, we don't have our son's friends, their parents, like the dad's not golfing for 8 hours on a Saturday, you know,
like it's not your generation, man. I don't know. I'm sure it is somewhere, but not the hip, cool people that you're going to be hanging out with, right?
It's interesting to see the shift, though. I think that
I think there's a big shift from when I started working on this, because men would be like, what I would hear was men have very little creativity when it comes to self-care, but they have no guilt. So if they decide they want to go for a run and it means they're going to be late for dinner, they don't care. And I think that has shifted a lot in the 25 years, 28 years I've been talking about this.
Yeah, and it could also be the paradigm shift with, you know, the working, what it means to the expectation of supporting your family, or, you know, being the person who's there to support. I know that a lot of the moms have very high powered jobs. And when it came down to like, who's going to have the flexible schedule, because I genuinely don't know how you can have two parents with high powered corporate jobs. I'm not sure how that works.
Yeah.
You need one person with flexibility. And so there's a lot of dads who either took more flexible jobs, more creative jobs. Like one of our son's friends is a photographer. And so he's always at the school pickup or the drop off, and his wife is an OBGYN, which is a very intense job. So I think there's also that shift of, it's okay to have, you don't necessarily the man doesn't necessarily have to be the breadwinner. I think that facade is slowly crumbling.
Yeah, good.
Good. Yeah. Good for all of us. Well, I would love to point people, you have a April retreat, but I think this episode may be airing during your retreat. So if people want to get involved and go to one of your retreats, where should they get started?
Well, the in-person retreats are all sold out for this year.
Well, congratulations.
Well, it always happens, but July doesn't have a wait list as far as I know right now. So that's always a good bet, because sometimes somebody gets sick or something happens. And then we're going to do, last year we piloted a virtual retreat to see if we could create the same magic. And so we're going to do 3 one-day virtual retreats, and there'll be one in May. I think the April one will have already passed when people watch this. And then there'll be one again in October or November. So those are one-day events, and we're all together on Zoom, and I make it as rich and wonderful as I can. They each have a different theme, so you can read about those.
So can we touch on that a little bit? I'd love to hear how you create that magic and create that freedom from distractions on a virtual retreat.
Well, so I hope that I create freedom from distractions. So what I do is I give them prep of a ebook, and I give them, you know, ideas about how they need to set up the day and what would be best. And then I start, you know, we're all on Zoom, so they can see me, they can see each other. I ask them, you know, you don't have to be on camera the whole time, but be on camera part of the time so we can feel this feeling of a room together. And then I try to use meditation techniques and body techniques and imagery to really create a sense of us all entering this space together. And then continue to reinforce that. And then when we dial off or we go off to have a break or do our writing, you know, I just do the same thing I do in an in-person retreat, remind them, like, these are the things that you want to do, these are the things you don't want to do, and really try to help them get really clear about that. Because I find most people, if they can say, like, all right, everybody else right now for an hour is writing and nobody else is checking Facebook or email, they can stick with it, right? So I just try to do everything I can to make it feel as vibrant as possible. And we do read to each other too. I put people in small groups and they read to each other.
That sounds wonderful. I can imagine just getting a hotel room and doing the virtual retreat.
Yeah, and we send that out ahead of time. We send ideas like, you know, do you want to get out of your house? Do you want to go to a friend's house? You know, what's really going to help? And, you know, I also have to accept that people have lives and sometimes they won't do that. And people have resistance, as we were talking about, because it is a self-care thing again too, right? Are you really going to give yourself this day? But what I stress is that this is a live experience. We record it. You can listen to recordings again, but this is not a recorded experience. This is not a class. This is a live experience we're creating together.
Very cool. That's so exciting. Well, everyone go check out the virtual retreats if you can't make the live retreats. And I will link to the website and everything in the show notes. Cool. And I believe you have a free download that people can access.
Oh, that is so cool. I wrote that, I don't know, probably 2 years ago now. And it's just so good. So what I did is I tried to make it the same way I kind of make my retreats. And it's for, you're stuck in your work. And there's a setup. And then what I ask you to do is I give you things to get unstuck. And when you come upon the first one you come upon that resonates with you, you have to, I make you promise me, so you're promising me right now that you stop right there and you do it. You don't keep reading it. And it has all these suggestions. And you can come back and read it later, but then you actually go and do something. So yeah, it's a really It's a good piece of work. I like that.
Fantastic. Well, I will link to it in the show notes, and everyone go grab it so you writers can be unstuck.
Yeah, or share it with somebody if you're not stuck right now.
Yeah, use it as part of your writing group or your own writing retreat.
Yes.
Jen, thank you. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you for spending this time with me.
Oh, well, thank you for such wonderful questions.